I knew something was off the moment I walked into the office, and the AC was blasting like we were storing frozen meat instead of broken dreams. My coffee machine sputtered like it wanted to quit before I could. The lights overhead flickered like they were in on the joke. Mondays at Havoc Systems were always grim, but this one had a specific kind of rot to it, the kind you can smell before it hits the fan. I ran my usual diagnostics, systems humming along like obedient pets, and started clearing out my inbox. 17 unread emails, 5 labeled urgent but sent by interns who just discovered the reply all button. I clicked through them, sipping the lukewarm coffee that tasted like someone dared the machine to be good. Then I saw it. An email thread I was never supposed to see, forwarded to me by accident by a junior exec trying to climb the wrong ladder. Subject line, restructure thoughts. Need input, and there it was. One line, tucked between Chase's bloviating and some Harvard MBA's buzzword salad. Is she even necessary anymore? She, like I was some outdated office printer. 18 years in this company. 3 pivots, 2 acquisitions, 1 bankruptcy scare, and 7 CEOs. I survived every one of them with my head down and my output up. But that line, that was the first spark in what was about to become a 4-alarm fire. Hey, real quick before we keep going, if you're one of the 90% listening to this without subscribing, do me a solid and hit that follow button. Toss a like if you've ever dealt with a corporate moron in khakis. It helps more than you know and keeps this chaos rolling. Anyway, Chase, the founder's golden boy nephew, 28 years old, shaped like a CrossFit ad and dressed like he lost a bet at Banana Republic. He'd been inserted into leadership 2 months ago, parachuted in straight from a failed fintech startup, and a trust fund thick enough to survive his idiocy. Officially, he was Executive Vice President of Strategic Transformation. Unofficially, he was the reason 3 good engineers quit, and our team Slack turned into a therapy group chat. That morning, he'd already canceled 3 of my meetings, didn't even bother with an explanation. Just wiped them off the calendar like swatting flies, and he reassigned my senior team lead, Anita, to support marketing initiatives, which is Chase speak for I have no idea what she does, so let's put her somewhere I'll never have to see her. I pinged him to ask what the hell was going on. No reply, just a thumbs up emoji. I wasn't new to this game. I'd worked under tech bros, finance bros, crypto bros, you name the flavor of male mediocrity, I'd survived it. But Chase had this cartoon villain energy. He smiled too wide, talked too loud, said disruption like it was foreplay. And worse, he thought he was clever. I remember standing at the coffee machine around 9:37 a.m., staring out over the open plan floor like a war general surveying a battlefield. The engineers were heads down, pretending not to notice the chaos. HR was holed up behind frosted glass, avoiding eye contact like they were guilty of something they were. And Chase, he was in the corner office he didn't earn, holding court with a whiteboard and 2 junior staffers who nodded like bobbleheads. Then Anita walked by, pale as drywall, clutching a manila envelope. Her eyes locked with mine for just a second. She didn't speak, just gave the slightest shake of her head and kept walking. That's when I knew this wasn't normal corporate entropy. This was a purge, and I was next. The email, the canceled meetings, the reassignment, those were just warm-ups. Chase wasn't just flexing. He was trying to erase me, and it wasn't going to go the way he thought. I walked back to my desk, calm as a crypt. I didn't throw a fit. I didn't cry. I opened my secure vault folder. Inside was a single document, digitally notarized, signed, timestamped, and long forgotten by everyone but me. Exhibit E, Clause 9C. Buried deep inside my IP agreement from 10 years ago. Last time the company tried to screw me, I made sure it'd never happen again. And Chase, he just lit the fuse. I should have known he'd do it in front of a crowd. Chase didn't know how to operate unless someone was watching, preferably someone younger, dumber, and willing to laugh at his punchlines like they were gospel. The weekly department meeting was usually dull as dishwater. People zoned out, checked Slack on the sly, muted their mics, and pretended their dogs barked just to escape. But today, everyone was dialed in, eyes up, smiles tight, like they smelled something sour but couldn't figure out where it was coming from. Chase walked in late, of course, swaggering like he was headlining Coachella, wearing a blazer 2 sizes too small and a grin that made my skin itch. He stood at the front like a game show host who forgot what he was giving away. "All right, team," he barked, clapping his hands like we were toddlers at a birthday party. "Time for some housekeeping." Everyone froze, not because of what he said. God knows Chase loved his little buzzword intros, but because of how he said it, that edge in his voice. The kind of tone that usually precedes mass layoffs or new dress codes dreamed up by someone who thinks cargo shorts are a hate crime. He scrolled through his tablet with dramatic flair, then looked straight at me. Locked eyes. "This'll be quick," he said, tapping the screen. "Some changes are happening. Alignment, streamlining, whatever word legal tells us to use." Then he stepped forward and his voice dropped half a register, just enough to sound serious, like he was about to recite scripture. "Janine Ross," he said. A murmur rippled through the room like someone dropped a penny in a baptismal font. "Your paycheck," he said, pausing to flash that smug-ass smirk, "is a courtesy." And my courtesy just expired. No warning, no HR rep. No performance review, just those words, delivered with the flair of a man who thinks firing someone makes his dick grow 2 inches. The silence after that was biblical. I closed my laptop, didn't say a word, didn't look at the others. I didn't need to. I knew their faces already, shocked, horrified, pretending not to be entertained. I stood up slowly, smoothed my blazer, tucked my laptop under my arm like it was an infant I'd just rescued from a burning building. Chase kept grinning like he thought I might cry or throw something or plead for my job. That was the part that tickled him, I'm sure, the performance he assumed I'd give. Drama for the peasants, tears on the boardroom floor, maybe a curse word or two, but I didn't give him the satisfaction, just walked. Out of that glass conference room, past the potted plant I'd kept alive for 3 years, past the interns who looked like they'd just witnessed a public execution, past the vending machine that only took Apple Pay ever since Chase decided coins were bad optics. I kept walking until I reached the hall where the private lockers were, old remnants from the company's more secure days. Mine was near the end. Locker 112 still had the faded sticker of a dancing penguin from a company Christmas party no one remembered anymore. I opened it with the key I kept on a chain around my neck. Inside was a single red folder, unlabeled, dustless, waiting. I pulled it out and tucked it under my arm next to the laptop. Then I checked my watch. 3:47 p.m. The clock had started, not just any clock, a very specific one. The moment I missed payroll by even a second, I was activated. And in 24 hours, if they didn't reverse course or issue full payment, they'd forfeit full rights to every piece of intellectual property I'd authored under my own encryption key. And let me be very clear, that key wasn't just for show. It guarded the adaptive logic core, the beating, billion-dollar heart of Havoc's systems. The reason investors kept showing up with champagne and empty promises. The reason we survived the acquisition in 2015. The reason we weren't already sold for parts to some PE firm in a strip mall in Jersey. Chase didn't know that, of course. He thought this was just a pissing contest. But I wasn't pissing. I was playing chess. And he'd just kicked over the queen. 10 years ago, Havoc's was circling the drain hard. We were 3 months out from payroll insolvency. The second acquisition deal in a year had just imploded, and the boardroom smelled like desperation and febres. Some guys from a biotech firm were sniffing around the edges, not because they wanted to buy us, but because they thought they could scrape off some patents like meat from a carcass. That's when the vultures moved in, consultants, crisis hires, and lawyers who charged by the hour to rearrange deck chairs on the Titanic. And in the middle of that chaos, I was the one person who actually built something worth stealing. The adaptive logic core, my baby, my obsession. An algorithmic framework so efficient it practically rewrote its own instruction sets to match hardware strain in real time. It was the kind of thing that would have gotten me poached by DARPA if I'd ever gone public about it. But I didn't. I kept it inside the Havoc's firewall. Not because I loved the company, hell no, but because I loved my team. The engineers, the weirdos, the ones who stayed late with me, tweaking thermal curves and soldering prototypes while eating cold ramen out of measuring cups. When the new deal came through, when Havoc's got scooped up by a holding company fronting as a disruptive data logistics firm, everyone had to sign revised contracts. Boilerplate stuff, according to legal. New IP ownership clauses, updated equity schedules, NDA renewals that were thicker than Bibles and twice as boring. But I didn't sign their template. Brought my own. Exhibit E, Clause 9C, my insurance policy. It stated plain and simple that any intellectual property authored, co-authored, or architected by me would revert to my personal LLC, Ross Parallel Systems, in the event I was terminated without documented, board-reviewed cause and not paid in full within 24 hours of said termination. And yes, I had the clause reviewed. Triple reviewed. Buried it under 6 layers of legalese. Even had it signed off by the then CTO who was too high on startup fumes to notice the barn door I'd left wide open. I filed it, stamped it, archived it. Then I waited. Not like a snake in the grass, more like a doomsday prepper with a single key to a nuclear silo. And on that Monday afternoon, standing in front of my locker with Chase's smug little echo still ringing in my ears, I turned the key. I took my laptop to my car, connected to my mobile hotspot, and logged into my secure cloud vault. Within seconds, I'd opened the trigger document, digitally notarized, sealed with my biometric token, timestamped to the minute. I clicked execute and watched the script run. 3 things happened instantly. 1. A legal notice of reversion request was filed with the U.S. Patent Office, citing contractual terms under Ross Parallel Systems, LLC, and Havoc's Systems' original acquisition framework. 2. An encrypted message was sent to Havoc's legal via a private third-party service, notifying them of potential IP reassignment pending payment verification. And 3. A countdown timer began, hosted on a remote blockchain record, tracking the 24-hour window with immutable timestamps. Now, to the average onlooker, I was just an ex-employee, fired and forgotten, probably rage-crying into a bottle of wine, and polishing up a LinkedIn resume that hadn't been touched since the Obama administration. But in reality, I was 23 hours and 58 minutes away from owning their entire goddamn kingdom. The adaptive logic core wasn't just some code. It was the cornerstone of every contract Havex had dangled in front of their investors. It powered their flagship product, Prox AI. It was licensed provisionally to 3 major telecoms and one defense contractor who probably thought we were a wellness app. Without it, Havex was a skeleton in a hoodie. I leaned back in my driver's seat, watched the sun start to dip behind the parking structure, and took the deepest breath I'd had in weeks. There was no anger anymore, no panic. Just the calm that comes when you know the hurricane's about to hit, but it's not coming for you. It's coming for the people who thought they could play God and fire the architect. The next morning, Chase strutted into the office like a man who just peed his name in the snow and wanted everyone to see it. He brought in view not the cheap celebratory swill from the discount shelf, but the stuff he thought made him look like a closer. 2 bottles, one for his desk and one for Instagram. The caption under his LinkedIn post read, "Making bold moves, out with the old. Big things coming at Havex." Hashtag, #NextGen Leadership. The post got 74 likes in the first hour, mostly from people too junior to say no and too terrified to comment anything real. Chase stood by the espresso machine holding court with the VP of marketing, bragging about streamlining legacy bloat and removing inertia. I guess that was me, human inertia. Meanwhile, my phone lit up with a few texts from coworkers who hadn't seen it coming. Anita, WTF? No warning? Dev, he's out of his mind. Mina from legal, please call me when you can. Off record, I didn't reply. It wasn't that I didn't appreciate them. I did. But this wasn't the moment for bacchannel grieving or whispered sympathy. The machine had already been set in motion. Now I had to stay silent and watch the collapse unfold with the stillness of a ticking clock. Across town, in a glass tower dressed up as a law firm, the buyer's legal team was deep in diligence hell. The acquisition was scheduled to close that Thursday, just 2 days out, and they were combing through every clause, license, contract, and asset like they were separating salt from sugar with tweezers. The junior associate assigned to the IP review was named Claire. First year, fresh out of Yale, still spell-checking the word indemnification every time she typed it. She was 2 hours into parsing the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office filings when she noticed something odd. A change of assignment request had been logged for patent hash 7 to 54 to 382, the core Havex patent linked to the adaptive logic core. The request had been filed late Monday afternoon, timestamped just after 3:47 p.m. It wasn't approved yet, just pending. Claire squinted. Assignment requests weren't uncommon during acquisitions. But this one, new assignee wasn't Havex or a buyer shell or even a partner entity. It was a company she didn't recognize, Ross Parallel Systems LLC. She flagged it with a sticky note in the shared diligence drive. Pending IP assignment, possible issue, needs review. That note would sit there for 13 hours before anyone took it seriously. At Havex, no one noticed a thing. The champagne buzz was in full swing. Chase scheduled a town hall to tout his new leadership vision, mandatory attendance and non-mandatory meaning. He called it Vision 2030, which sounded like something a failed congressman would yell during a panic attack. The deck was full of recycled stock photos and phrases like operational synergy and cross-functional optimization. Nobody asked about me. Not in public, anyway. In private, my name was whispered like a ghost in the hallways. Everyone knew something had gone sideways, but Chase's energy was too loud, too aggressive, too performative for anyone to speak up. HR acted like they were still formalizing the offboarding, as if I'd just wandered off campus during lunch and forgotten to check out. Meanwhile, in a climate-controlled server cage buried beneath the engineering floor, a piece of code, a watchdog script I'd written 8 years ago, pinged an alert every hour, checking for payroll confirmation. It came up empty every time. No payment, no reversal, no idea. 20 hours left. The fuse wasn't just burning. It had reached the drywall, and the people inside the house were still toasting with bubbly. Wednesday morning started like every other emergency disguised as a workday. Alarm bells muffled by calendar invites, coffee machines coughing up burnt promises, and Slack channels humming with that passive-aggressive anxiety only tech startups can perfect. Except this time, there was a problem no one could meme their way out of. The CTO, Paul Langston, a sharp guy when he wasn't trying to be Chase's emotional support animal, sat hunched over his terminal in the war room, rubbing his temples like he could massage a solution out of his own skull. The core wasn't responding. Specifically, the adaptive logic framework, my framework, had triggered a secure lockdown mode that hadn't been accessed in almost a decade. They tried credentials, old keys, archive tokens. Nothing worked. Paul turned to the DevOps lead. "Try her backup key," he said. "We don't have it," came the reply. Paul frowned. "Then ping her encrypted vault, maybe she left an access map." The DevOps lead just stared at him. Her vault was tied to her personal biometric key. That left with her. That's when Paul sat back in his chair slowly. Now, Paul was the kind of guy who could watch a data center catch fire and still mumble something about failover architecture. When he realized that none of them, not legal, not engineering, not even the damn founder, had control over the encryption gateway into the company's flagship product, the color drained out of his face. He pulled Chase into a side room. Chase, of course, was mid-brag on another video call, this time with some VC who wore sunglasses indoors and kept saying things like, "You guys are killing it." Paul shut the door and dropped the bomb. "She locked us out of the core." Chase blinked. "What?" "The logic code is encrypted under her personal key. We can't access it. Not a single line of the compiler logic, not the real-time adaptation layer, not even the diagnostic protocols." Chase rolled his eyes like Paul had just told him the vending machine was out of protein bars. "She was just a code monkey, Paul. We'll reverse engineer it." Paul didn't laugh. "You can't reverse engineer something that rewrites itself based on proprietary entropy keys. She built the randomness source into the substrate. We'd have to nuke the entire framework and start from scratch." Chase shrugged. "Then start. It's code. It's not magic." And that was the moment, right there, when Mark finally stepped in. Mark Reinhardt, the founder's older brother and lead Series C investor. The man who once saved Havix from collapse by writing a personal $18M check while drunk at a golf charity auction. He'd always stayed out of day-to-day operations, preferring to pop in at board meetings like a ghost of financial Christmas past. But now, Mark was pacing outside the glass office like a lion in loafers, had just gotten word that the buyer's legal team had sent a second follow-up regarding a pending change of IP assignment and needed clarification before continuing the final diligence pass. He stormed in without knocking. "Someone want to tell me why the hell the system is down?" Paul answered carefully. "It's not down, it's encrypted. We're locked out." Mark turned to Chase. "And why exactly was she fired?" Chase gave the same rehearsed line he'd given everyone else. "Misalignment with the company's forward vision. Legacy and efficiencies, we needed fresh thinking." Mark didn't blink. "She owned the patent," he said. "No," Chase replied. "The company owns the patent." Paul shifted awkwardly. That's possibly under review." Mark stared at him like he'd just said Santa Claus was real and armed. "What the hell does that mean?" Paul swallowed. "There was a clause in her original contract. Something about reversion of rights in the event of termination without cause and non-payment within stop." Mark turned slowly and walked out. "Dialed my number. Let it ring." Voicemail. He tried again. No dice. Third time, same result. My phone was on silent. Face down on a windowsill in a boutique hotel in Santa Fe, screen untouched, world muted. I had nothing to say to Mark. Not yet, because this wasn't the part where I spoke. This was the part where they listened. To silence, to the echoes of their own arrogance, and to the sound of Chase's linked and bravado curdling in real time. By 11 o'clock a.m., Mark was back in the boardroom with the founder, voice low, hands clenched. "You let your idiot nephew fire the one person holding the kill switch." And the founder, he just stared at the floor, because deep down he already knew. The pressure cooker was sealed, and the steam was building. At 9:13 a.m. on the dot, paralegal from Rowland and Finch LLP, counsel for the buyer, sent a short, lethal email to Havix Legal with the subject line: "Urgent patent hash 7 to 54 to 382, ownership confirmation, needed today." The body was short. One question. "Please confirm Havix Systems retains uncontested ownership of patent hash 7 to 54 to 382 as it relates to the adaptive logic core, including all derivative works and subcomponents, as outlined in Schedule B of the acquisition term sheet." 7 sentences total. But those 7 sentences were the legal equivalent of watching water pour into the Titanic's first-class lounge. Within 10 minutes, the Havix legal team was on fire. Not literally, though from the way Judith, the general counsel, was shouting, you'd think someone had set the printer ablaze. Junior counsel dug through the IP folder structure, opened the patent file history, and noticed something odd. There, filed 2 days ago, was a pending change of assignment notice. Filed at 3:47 p.m. Name on the document, Ross Parallel Systems LLC. Attached to it was a supporting clause from an employment contract dated nearly a decade earlier. Judith leaned over the paralegal's desk. "What the hell is this?" He scrolled up, hands shaking slightly. "I think it's an IP reversion clause. It's signed, digitally sealed, time-stamped. Countersigned by the CTO at the time. And it's airtight." Judith took one look at the clause and turned pale, not metaphorically, like blood evacuated from the soul pale. Clause 9C, Exhibit E. In the event of termination without documented cause, and in the absence of full payment within 24 hours, all intellectual property authored or co-authored by Janine Ross shall revert, in full, to Ross Parallel Systems LLC, effective immediately. She whispered, "How the hell did this get through? Looks like it was buried in the supplemental IP appendix during the 2015 acquisition. No one's touched it since." That's when Judith called the emergency meeting. And Chase? He was at a team-building offsite. Literally. in a zipline harness. He'd taken a dozen interns and a marketing coordinator named Aspen to a faux wilderness retreat where tech bros reconnected with leadership values by throwing axes and screaming into the woods. His last Slack message, timestamped 8:32 a.m., read, "Going offline for clarity today. No calls unless it's on fire." Well, it was on fire. Judith didn't wait. By 10:15 a.m., every executive not dangling from a tree was crammed into conference room B with their faces lit by the glow of the claws on the projector screen. Mark was already there, arms crossed like a statue at a funeral. Paul, the CTO, sat in silence, his foot bouncing like it wanted to flee. The founder stood at the back, staring at the claws like it had personally betrayed him. Judith read it out loud, every word landing like a hammer strike. And according to the time-stamped execution notice, she finished, "The 24-hour window expires today." At 3:46 p.m. Silence. Then Mark, "What happens at 3:47? Judith didn't blink. At 3:47, Havix no longer owns the adaptive logic core, the heart of our valuation, the centerpiece of our buyer presentation, the cornerstone of Proc's AI's entire architecture. Mark exhaled through his nose, the kind of breath people take before deciding whether to sue or scream. Paul turned to the founder. "We need to call her. Offer her anything." "She's not picking up," the founder mumbled. Mark tried, "So did I." Judith nodded grimly because she knows and she planned this. Another silence fell, thicker, heavier, like gravity had doubled. In the far corner, the COO piped up, voice high with fear. "Can we dispute the clause?" Judith shook her head. "It's solid. It survived a decade, multiple audits, and 3 restructuring cycles. She executed it precisely. We're legally bound." Then someone asked the question that had been buzzing in everyone's skulls. "Where the hell is Chase?" Judith didn't even bother answering because it didn't matter anymore. It was 10:27 a.m., the iceberg had surfaced, and the ship, it was still moving full speed ahead. At 12:04 p.m., the walls finally cracked. Not literally. Oh, someone in accounting did knock over a standing lamp trying to bolt out of the break room once the whispers started. Mark Reinhardt had abandoned all semblance of decorum. Gone was the aloof board member with the polite smirk and polished shoes. He stormed into the founder's office like a man who just discovered his retirement plan was a lie wrapped in nepotism. "You knew," he barked, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the glass. "You knew she held the keys. Why didn't you stop him?" The founder, Peter, now looking less like a CEO and more like a man on his 3rd night without sleep, lifted his head from his hands. "I didn't think she'd pull it," he muttered. I don't know that she was bluffing." Mark blinked, slowly, then stepped forward until he was practically on top of him. "She was with this company for 18 years. She built the engine, Peter, the code, the patents, the infrastructure. You think she bluffs? You think someone like Janine bluffs?" Peter's mouth opened, closed. He tried again. "Chase said Chase?" Mark's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Your idiot nephew thinks a backend is a gym term. He's out ziplining while the company is hemorrhaging equity and you let him fire the only person who ever held the goddamn blueprint to Havix." Peter stood, finally. "Don't put this all on me. She never said anything. She could have, she wrote the clause, Pete. That was her saying something. You just didn't listen." At 12:38 p.m., Peter called me again for the 5th time. I let it go to voicemail again, because by then I was already at Gate 27, Terminal B, Santa Fe Regional Airport. My carry-on was light, just a weekend bag, my backup laptop, a leather-bound notebook, and a boarding pass to somewhere with no boardrooms and no Chase. The terminal was nearly empty. Sunlight spilled through the big windows, tinting everything in warm orange light. Outside, a small regional jet hummed softly, waiting. I sat by the window, watching it refuel. I didn't check social media, didn't scroll through the dozens of unread messages or the 6 voicemails from unknown numbers. I just sipped my coffee, real coffee, not the burned sludge from the office machine, and listened to the silence. At 12:52 p.m., I opened my laptop one last time, typed out a short, final message. Subject, IP clause executed to legal at Havixcom, Peter at Havixcom, M. Reinhardt at R GroupNet CC. My attorney. Body, clause 9C executed. As of 3:46 p.m. today, all rights to the adaptive logic core and associated systems have reverted to Ross Parallel Systems LLC. Please direct all further communication to my legal counsel, whose information is attached. Regards, Janine Ross. I clicked send. Watched the email disappear. And then I closed the laptop, tucked it away, and powered off my phone. I didn't need to see what happened next. But back at Havix, they were watching every minute bleed from the clock like blood from a wound they couldn't stitch shut. Judith had already canceled the buyer's 2 p.m. walkthrough. The board was convening an emergency session. Chase's phone was finally ringing in some forest retreat, but no one knew if he'd answer, or if he'd even understand what was happening. Because at that point, it wasn't just about a missed clause. It was about everything Havix had become, built on Janine's code, Janine's system, Janine's brain, and the fact that now every bit of it was walking out the door with her. Peter sat in his office, staring at the phone like it owed him an apology. Mark stood by the window, arms crossed, watching storm clouds roll in. And the clock, it read 1:17 p.m. 2 hours and 29 minutes left. Tick, tick. The The boardroom smelled like old money and fresh panic. At exactly 3:06 p.m., the buyer's legal team arrived, two senior partners and one associate, faces blank, suits crisp, briefcases humming with quiet, calculated doom. No smiles, no small talk, not even the usual handshake parade that precedes a $350 million acquisition. Just nods, just paper. The founder, Peter, stood as they entered but didn't say a word. Judith, the general counsel, gave a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. Mark was already seated, arms folded so tight across his chest you'd think he was holding himself back from throwing a chair. They all took their seats. Then came the moment, the beginning of the end. One of the lawyers, a man named Lowell with a voice like ice on glass, opened a sleek leather folder, pulled out a single printed sheet, and slid it across the long oak table toward Peter. No preamble, no legalese, just one sentence. This document shows the system no longer belongs to Havix. Peter blinked, swallowed, reached out like the paper might bite him. The others leaned in, Judith, the coup, the head of product, even the outside compliance officer they'd flown in that morning just in case. Chase's father, Richard, was seated two chairs down. He'd shown up late, still in a golf shirt, reeking of aqua dye panic and whatever bourbon he thought passed for confidence. At those words, no longer belongs, his entire face drained. Peter's lips moved as he read, barely whispering the words aloud. Clause 9C, termination without cause, 24 hours, reversion of all intellectual property authored by Janine Ross. Effective 3:46 p.m. Today, he looked up slowly. Judith leaned forward, almost pleading. There must be something we can offer. Some form of Lowell cut her off. We will not proceed until ownership is resolved. As of now, there is a legal conflict on your most valuable asset. You're attempting to sell what you no longer own. Richard sat back in his chair like he'd been punched in the ribs. He turned to Peter, voice thin. You knew about this? Peter shook his head slowly. I thought she wouldn't go through with it. Mark, still silent until now, leaned forward. Let your idiot nephew destroy a $350 million deal in 24 hours. That was the moment. The air changed. Nobody breathed. Nobody moved. Even the lights seemed to dim under the weight of it. Judith's hands were shaking. The COO stared straight ahead, eyes glassy, as if he could manifest a time machine by sheer willpower. The junior associate from the buyer's team discreetly slid her laptop closed like she'd just witnessed a funeral. And Chase was still unreachable. Last seen in an Instagram story posted by one of the interns, shirtless, laughing, holding a foam axe with a caption that read, Offsite Vibes Firehash Leadership Unplugged. Mark tapped the table twice. Quiet, final. Peter read the clause one more time as if the words might change under pressure. Then he whispered so quietly half the room didn't hear him, oh my God, and that was it, the moment it all crumbled. No yelling, no slamming fists, just the kind of silence that follows a bomb going off, not the blast itself, but the realization that nothing will ever be the same. Outside, the clock ticked. 3:32 p.m., 14 minutes left. By 3:47 p.m., the deal was dead. Not in some dramatic, flip-the-table kind of way, no yelling, no slammed briefcases, no thrown coffee mugs. Just a quiet, coordinated withdrawal from the buyer's side. A partner leaned in, whispered something to Lowell, and he stood, nodded once, and closed the leather folder with the same care you'd used to shut the lid on a coffin. We're going to pause this process, he said, tone even but final, pending resolution of your IP situation. If rights are not clarified within the next 48 hours, we'll consider the offer withdrawn entirely. Mark didn't say a word. He just stood, looked around the room, then fixed his eyes on Peter for one long, empty second. His face wasn't angry, it was worse than that. It was exhausted. This was avoidable, he muttered, but you let a child play CEO, and now the board will be cleaning this mess for years. Then he turned and walked out, already pulling up a call on his phone, probably canceling his funding before he even hit the elevator. The collapse rippled like a silent avalanche. By 4:30 p.m., Havix's Slack workspace went oddly quiet. One by one, leadership channels flickered to life with notices. The acquisition channel was archived. M and a tracker was made read only. And Chase, gone. His name vanished from the org chart before most of the staff even realized what happened. No announcement, no goodbye email, just a missing row in the Google Sheet and a redacted title on the internal wiki. Word around the office was that he was taking time to recalibrate. Translation, the axe finally fell. Too late, but hard. Judith put out a vague internal statement about unforeseen legal complexities delaying partnership negotiations. The lawyers stayed late. PR started prepping a soft spin press release. The founder's office light never turned on again. And somewhere between that and the next morning, a new message hit my inbox. Subject, request for licensing discussion from Legal at Havixcom Body. Dear Miss Ross, acknowledge that Ross Parallel Systems LLC now retains full ownership of the adaptive logic core as outlined in Exhibit E, Clause 9C. In light of ongoing operational needs, we'd like to initiate a discussion regarding potential licensing terms. Our preliminary offer is in the low seven-figure range with quarterly performance bonuses. Please advise on preferred next steps or legal point of contact. Warm regards. Have ex-legal team I read it once. Then again. Then I smiled and replied with 3 words. Terms have changed, no punctuation, no flair, just the truth because they had, not just the licensing terms, but everything. They were no longer negotiating from a place of power. I wasn't the legacy employee they could silence in a boardroom or discard in a team meeting. I was the owner of the thing they needed most, the crown jewel, the engine, the reason they existed. And I'd walked away with it, calm, quiet, and unbothered. That evening, as the last tendrils of sun dipped below the mountains, I stood on the balcony of my little adobe airbnb, watching the horizon melt into orange and violet. The desert was still, windless, full of that strange kind of silence that only comes when a storm has passed. My phone was off. My laptop closed. No more emails, no more meetings, no more chase. Just me, a glass of mezcal, and the peace of knowing I didn't burn it down. They did. I just happened to own the land underneath it, and now they'd have to pay rent. Big thanks for watching, you sneaky seniors. Subscribe to keep the coffee pot brewing revenge. Your ex-colleagues won't know what hit 'em.